Welcome to the Organic Chemistry Lab, PS224. In this lab, there are several things that I'm going to show you, starting with the setup of the lab. There are two sides to this lab. On one side of the lab, you have your hoods. There are four. There's generally 2 people per hood. Each chemical hood will have their own hot plate, sand bath, some other equipment, hoses. There is a light to turn it on and off so that you can get light inside. Every hood will have its own solvents. Between 2 hoods is going to be your sink, your DI water, and your eye wash station, along with soap and paper towels. So far that's one eye wash station, but there's multiple of them. Here's another hood, same setup. And if we go around the room, you'll see there's another set of hoods. So let's go to the other side of the room, and then I'll show you other things in this room. So we can say it's the same setup, except there are only 3 hoods available to the students to use in this room. We have 2 on this side, which has a eye wash station, sink, and DI water in between. So that's 2 eye wash stations so far. And then the third one, on the other side, we have an eye wash station, and then we have another one over here. So far there's a total of 4, 1 at each sink. And so there's 4 sinks. The 4th hood over here has some equipment in it and waste containers that you'll use. You'll come and get your waste containers each lab and then put your waste in there. So there's 3 hoods that are used by students on this side. Now there is a 5th eye wash station. The 5th eye wash station is located here. It has 2 setups at the eye wash station. To turn it on, you turn this lever. So hopefully you won't have to use that. And we have a shower. And so we only want to use the shower if we absolutely need to. So you want to keep your goggles on. So same thing at the eye wash stations. To turn the eye washes on would be this little button. Now let's take a little bit of a tour of the glassware in your drawers. So each drawer, each hood has their own drawer. There's a glassware drawer, and this is where you'll keep all your glassware, so anything that's made of glass. And in this drawer, you're going to keep pretty much everything else. So in this drawer, we are going to have things like our stir bars. You're going to have needles. You're going to have your plastic ice containers. One thing that is glass, but it's in a container, is the micro scale kits. So you'll take those out when you need those. TLC plates, things like thermometers, and so on are in this drawer. When you first come to lab, you should take out your laptop, phone, or tablet as you need for lab, and everything else can go inside here in terms of your backpack, purses, etc. Once you are entering the lab, however, any food containers, water bottles should never be in your bag. They should always be outside, and you can leave them outside, just outside the door. One thing that's important is if you wear contact lenses, it should be noted on your safety sheet that you sign and give to your instructor. However, if you are going to be taking them out, make sure you take them out in the bathroom, not in the lab, so before even entering the lab. Now, let me give you a quick little tour of some of the other things you might need to know in this room. So we have our first aid kit. Generally though, if there is an issue, you go to your instructor first. You don't go to the first aid kit. Our spill station. This is our oven for our lab. And the oven opens by turning the knob and then closes by turning the knob back when we open it. So if I open it, I turn it this way, you can see it's inside, it's just an oven. We have our IR, which is used to determine functional groups on molecules, typically for organic. That is, it has some other purposes for us. There are two of these. These are refractometers. We have a couple of UV lamps. We have a polarimeter, UV vis. In each area we have melt temps. Each area also has scales for you, so measuring scales. And then each little area also has a container with your commonly used materials. So this is where you might find things like sand and so on. Now, if your instructor wants you to come over and show you some stuff on the board, you'll come on this side. We have a couple of broken glass containers, which are here, and another one back here. If you're in the advanced lab courses, you might use these instruments. Well, you will, which is our monowaves. And at times you may be asked to put things in the refrigerator, and this is the refrigerator. So that's a basic tour of this lab. Now, one other thing that you may need is ice, and our ice area is here. It's near the eye wash station, and so ice is in there. Our scoop is here. When you're ready, you just grab the scoop, scoop out your ice, put it in your container, and put the scoop on the top. Never leave a scoop inside the ice or it will get lost. So that's pretty much it. Enjoy! So the second half of the video will talk about laboratory safety. Please follow any additional guidance that is given to you by your professor. It is very important that you pay attention to safety rules. Safety is an obligatory topic that has to be discussed before you can work in the lab. So even if you worked in a lab previously, every time you start a new science course, you need to go through safety training. In this tutorial, we'll talk about kind of an overview of the safety in the lab. You saw some of the safety equipment at the beginning of this video, like the safety shower, the eye wash stations. However, it's not a replacement for reading your safety contract or any safety rules for each of the labs. This is not an extensive list and by no means is a reason not to comply with your professor. There are times that your professor will have additional guidance that is separate from this instruction. In general, please note that your laboratory professor may ask you to leave the lab if you violate any of these rules, and you may be given 0 for that day. Firstly, there is no food or drink in the lab. It's also not acceptable to eat or drink in the lab, so don't come with food in your mouth. That includes chewing gum. One of the safety reasons that students oftentimes don't think of with bringing food into the lab is that, especially in this laboratory, which is organic chemistry, organic particles easily can get into your material. They can go through plastics oftentimes, and the vapors go through your material. So students are not allowed to work in the lab when your professor is not present. Only students who are registered for that lab and that section are allowed to be in the section. You must have on eye protection as soon as you get into that lab. No questions asked. Your lab professor can easily send you out of the lab at any point in time you are not putting on your safety goggles. If you need to wipe your eyes or you need to take your goggles off at any point in time because they're fogging or anything like that, you are able to
leave the lab without asking your professor's permission if you just need to clear your goggles. Keep your hands away from your face every time you're working, because your face is one of the more sensitive parts of your body, and anything that you get on your face could be hazardous. Wash your hands as soon as you're done with lab, and definitely before you leave the lab, you should wash your hands, because anything that's on your hands will go with you home. Do not wear any of your protective gear, your PPE, outside of the lab, and that includes if you wear any lab coats, your goggles, your gloves, because they do contain chemicals. Always keep your workstation neat and clean, and be prepared before you come to lab for doing the lab. This is where the majority of hazards lie, is in the lack of preparation. If you do not know what it is that you're coming in to do, you will ultimately be unsafe to yourself and everybody else. Know when there is emergency by paying attention, also what to do in an emergency. And so I'll quickly go through these things. So proper PPE, personal protective equipment, also includes proper dress. So you need to come into lab properly dressed, but when you're in lab, you need to be wearing your goggles, and when appropriate, you wear gloves. And so here are some examples. So eye protection does not mean your regular reading glasses or whatever kind of glasses, nor safety glasses appropriate for an organic lab because of the vapors. So you need to be wearing safety goggles. And safety goggles look like what you see on the screen right here. Are appropriate to prevent vapors from getting in your eye. So even if something splashes, it should not get into your eye. So you may still need to wash your face, but you should not have to wash your eyes unless something gets in there. You can wear these with prescription glasses, and you can wear them with your contact lenses. However, contact lenses should not be worn in the lab if possible. Now, you can wear it. If possible, please wear glasses instead. The reason for this is not because it's that we're looking for protection for your eyes per se, because contact lenses can't do that. And your goggles can help you to prevent exposure, but it's still a slight risk of contamination if any vapors get through your goggles, or even if you have a splash and something drips into your goggles. Contact lenses add an additional safety hazard. If you are wearing contact lenses, please let your instructor know on your safety contract. And please, before coming into lab, if you are going to take them out before entering the lab. Do not take your contact lenses off in the lab, or they need to be discarded of. If anything splashes in your eye at any point in time, you do need to discard those contact lenses. If you want, you are allowed to wear lab coats. It's not required for these labs. Actually, lab aprons are pretty good and probably the best prevention, because things will drip off of them, whereas lab coats are for minor things. So if you splash things on your lab coat, you could still be contaminated, whereas plastic rubber aprons are not usually susceptible to that. This is where most students make the biggest mistake, is closed-toed shoes. This is not Mary Jane's or any of those other things, and I'll show you examples. Closed-toed shoes, need to be worn at all times during the lab. If you're wearing sandals, cloth sneakers, perforated shoes, those are not allowed for safety reasons, because liquids can get through them very easily. All of these are not allowed. So these little Crocs, a lot of people love them, but they have lots of little holes and the backs are not covered. A lot of people make the mistake about these because they are closed-toed, they're closed in the back, but it doesn't cover the tops of your feet. These should not be worn unless you're wearing socks with them. And of course, bare feet, definitely not allowed. These are examples of shoes that are definitely allowed into the lab. Now, many sneakers are somewhat cloth, but try to avoid ones that are like really thin types of cloth material. But gloves are a good safety equipment, piece of that you can use. However, they're not necessary all the time. Do not just walk into the lab and throw on a pair of gloves. There are reasons why we don't want you to just randomly be wearing gloves. One of them is actually because it's an environmentally unsustainable practice to just constantly be wearing gloves for absolutely no reason. So some of your labs will not necessarily require that you wear gloves or not require that you wear gloves all the time. I must stress, though, that if you spill chemicals on your gloves, you should go wash your gloves. Those gloves are not meant to be impenetrable permanently. They're just a short-term barrier. So in general, if you do not come appropriately dressed, your instructor, depending on the lab, might give you some time to go home, get dressed, and come back and do your lab. If you're chronically doing this, you may just be asked to be dropped from the lab. Typically, if it's your second offense, you will just be sent home and given a 0. And if you keep doing this, you may actually be reported to the dean and may be dropped from the course for safety reasons. Goggles can be obtained from the American Chemical Society students, and if you don't have a chance to get to them, you can usually buy them online or through the bookstore. Tie your hair back if you have long hair. Anything that can move and get anywhere, definitely if it's anything that's past your ears, it definitely needs to be tied back. If it can be tied back, tie it back. Using hairspray, gels, or mousse is not a good enough way to tie your hair back. As well as they're extremely flammable, so that being your option is actually the worst thing you can do. Wear clothing that fits. So I want you to wear appropriate clothing that covers your body, but if it's too loose, it may also get into things and may get trapped on things. So sometimes having loose clothing, they can get trapped on corners of tables and doorknobs, and that can cause accidents. Also, anything that's cut off too high, where if you stretch your stomach shows or your legs show, that is not an appropriate thing to do. I strongly recommend wearing socks, even if your feet are completely covered, because you will be standing quite a bit, and it does provide extra padding for your time in the lab, but it also provides extra protection of your ankles, which tends to be the spot on your legs that things do get spilled if you spill or break something. Try to wear comfortable shoes. 3-inch heels is really not very comfortable after 2 hours in the lab. Wearing clothing that is somewhat breathable, so natural fibers like cotton are helpful, because moving and doing things in the lab, sometimes you can get quite warm. But I would also, although it's not on here, I would recommend bringing a sweater with you, because sometimes the lab can actually be on the opposite side and get really cold. It is suggested that you wear clothing that you don't care so much about. This is not the time to be wearing your $3,000 Gucci shirt, because little tiny splatters of chemicals could get on your clothes, and then it might ruin them. Also, if you don't want to wear the lab clothes that you need to wear, you can bring clothes with you and change before coming into the lab, so change in the bathroom. It's also a good idea that you do that if you want to have spare clothing as well, but it's not mandatory. You can wear jewelry, but it's not advisable. So I strongly recommend don't wear valuable jewelry in the lab in case you damage it. But I definitely recommend that you avoid wearing jewelry if you can to the lab in general. So the general safety equipment that we have is first aid kit. Please make sure that you contact your professor before using any of the safety equipment. The dust broom and the broken glass container you can use at any point in time that you'd like to use them without contacting your professor, but you should let your professor know that something is broken. Fume hoods are our mechanism in lab to help prevent you from having fumes and flammables too close to you. So you'll do most of your experimentation in the hoods. Sinks also have eye wash stations, as you saw before. The sink is where you'll wash all your glassware. It will also be the place that you wash your arms and hands, especially in the case of spilling. Safety showers, hopefully you'll never need to use them, but safety showers, you saw in the video, you saw we had one safety shower. This is not something that you run and use yourself. You notify your professor will help you. And this is only for major spills. So minor things can easily be treated otherwise, because this is not a fun thing to do, to have 15 minutes of this cold water. And sometimes it's not, because the water sits for a long time, isn't actually very clean water, can run over your body. And so the other thing is the eye wash stations. Wear your goggles at all times, because this is not the most pleasant experience for most students to have to flush their eyes for about 15 minutes at the station. If an alarm goes off, if it's a fire alarm, you will exit the building and go to the Branscombe parking lot, and I'll talk about that in a second. If it's a storm, then you go to the basement. Sometimes there are other locations that we might be sent to, but follow your instructor's information when told to. If something happens to another student, unless you are CPA certified, please do not try to do anything to any student, no matter how desperate you think that they are, because you could be causing more harm to them. Like I said, broken glass goes in a broken glass container. If you spill anything, those quickly need to be picked up. If it's small, you can use paper towels. If it's large, please contact your professor. If there's a fire, please shout for help for your professor immediately. This is not a place that you need to play around with, because this is a lab with a lot of organics that can catch on fire. So please let them know. They'll usually cover it, because most of the time it's small fires. If it's large, then we'll need to evacuate the building. When you need to evacuate, there are a couple of steps that you need to do. One, turn off all flames or plug out all hot plates. There's usually no flames in our lab, by the way, and plug out any other electronic or electric equipment. Follow any instructions that your professor gives you. You can, if you have time, if it's not something where you're going to die immediately, you want to maybe quickly, not slowly pack and organize your bags, but you may want to pack your bags or get your car keys, your dorm keys, because sometimes these things can be 5 minutes, sometimes they can be 5 hours, and you may not want to be stranded in the building or near the building, or even on campus if you live off campus. Walk calmly out the door. This is not a time to run. Sometimes running makes things worse, and this is not a time to decide to take the elevator unless you have a handicap. And then you're going to exit and go to the location that you need to be in. If there's any injuries, which most injuries are caused because you're not following safety instructions, you need to notify your professor immediately. Injuries that result from medical issues, such as fainting and seizing and things like that, those are oftentimes caused because a student has some sort of illness, which the professor needs to be notified of immediately. Your professor may call safety, or ask you to call safety, or someone to call safety, and then they may call 911 while they're trying to take care of a student. Please do eat or drink or take vital medications prior to walking into the lab door. So not in the lab, but prior to coming to the lab, to prevent any medical issues that are associated with eating, drinking, or taking medication. So one thing you should look at online, there's some information posted for you, is the GHS symbols, because you might see these on your chemicals, you might see them in the lab, and you should be aware of what they mean without your professor directly telling you these. So you need to know this, especially for your safety quiz. There are other symbols that you might see in the lab. One other symbol that you might see is these triangles, or these diamond-shaped things that look at reactivity, flammability, and health.